Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the That Was Stupid podcast. I am your host, John Seidel, where we have candid conversations on taking chances and proving everyone wrong. And today we have a really incredible story. It's vulnerable, it's real, it's raw, and I'm really excited to share it with you. Our guest is Sarah Matzke. She's a mom of 5, lives in Colorado. She's just like a lot of you, right? And yet she has a story of deep pain, but also incredible redemption. But before we get to that, let me remind you that That Was Stupid is brought to you by the Veritas Creative. If you're watching, you can see that sign behind me. If you have a book inside you and you want to get it out, if you have a story that you want to get out, if you need help just telling other stories that you have, maybe it's not in book form, go ahead and go to theveritascreative.com and they can help you tell your story, tell your stories of impact, and they would love to help you. In fact, I helped Sarah tell her story as well, and I'm just so proud of what we did together, but mostly proud of her and her obedience to share what she knew she had to share. So go to theveritascreative.com. So Sarah is an interesting story on so many levels. One of them is because in college, I actually knew Sarah's story. She didn't know that. I didn't know it when we were reintroduced about a year and a half ago. But when I was in college, I had heard a story from a friend of mine about a young woman who had recently gotten married and had cheated on her husband. And they were in crisis. And so this friend asked me to pray for her friend, and we did. And I just, that's kind of all I knew of the story and what happened. And so a year and a half ago, this friend said, hey, my friend Sarah is looking for help in putting her story together in book form. Would you be willing to talk with her? And so I start talking and I realize, oh my gosh, this is the woman from college. Like, this is that story. And so that led to a great relationship. So Sarah and I have been working together for the last year and a half to put her story together in book form. That book is finally published. It is called Desert Vineyards, and it is an incredible story of redemption. And so we're going to talk to Sarah today about that story. How does she go from the, in a sense, all-American mom, all-American wife, I guess, at that point, and cheat on her husband, not just cheat on her husband, but cheat on her husband with her husband's best friend. And I think this happens, more often than we like to admit. I heard about this happening recently, maybe not the best friend part, but just infidelity, and especially infidelity that happens on the wife's part. And so we're going to talk to Sarah about the lies that she believed that led to this, the lies that she believed even earlier than that, in the form of an eating disorder that then got her used to making compromises. And so I am really, really excited for you to hear Sarah's story. So without further ado, Sarah Matzke talking about Desert Vineyards. Sarah, thank you so much for joining the That Was Stupid podcast. This is one of the episodes I've been looking forward to just the most all season. And that's not to take away from any of the other episodes. I love all of them. But this one comes with a little bit more personal stake into the story because I've been a part of it, and it's crafting for a long time. And so I am so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you. Yes, no, I'm honored to be on your podcast. And so, yes, thank you for having me.
So you have quite the story, and I teased it a little bit in the introduction, and I really do mean when I say that your story and you talking about it has made an impact on my life. And I'm just so thankful for your obedience. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, to tell your story when you don't want to, because you know what? I have a story too that I didn't want to tell, right? I was like, I'm going to tell, and I'm going to write about anything but this. And that's kind of some of the lines you talk about in your new book, Desert Vineyards, which just came out. And so I guess, first of all, just give us a little bit of context of who you are, where you live. I mean, we have celebrities on the show. We have people that are, whatever, but we also like to have regular people. And I don't say that in a condescending way, but you
It's
are a
okay.
regular person. And I love that. So give us a little bit of
Not
context.
not a celebrity. Yeah.
Yet.
Yeah, I mean, I live in a small town in Firestone, Colorado, and I've lived in Colorado my whole life. And now I'm raising 5 kids and I live here with my husband. And so, it's pretty normal, you know, day to day is raising 5 kids. So,
And not just 5 kids, like 5 boys.
5 boys. Yeah. Yeah. It's busy. There's lots of energy, but I don't know any different. So I wouldn't have it any other way. And, but yeah, I mean, that's my present day of just, I used to work from home and, wanted to stay home with my kids. And so, with each kid, I went down to less and less hours. And now my husband has 2 jobs. So I don't work any, I just take care of the kids so he could, do his thing. So, yeah.
All right. So let's get into the story because we're going to take up all the time because it is so multifaceted and complex. And so the book is called Desert Vineyards, and it follows your journey really dealing with a lot of the lies that you have believed throughout your life. And those lies really manifested early on in an eating disorder, which then, the getting used to believing lies, led you to this story of infidelity with your husband's best friend, and then even manifested in motherhood, right? So take us back to maybe the first set of lies and the eating disorder that gripped you from a young age.
I grew up in the 90s and, there was a lot of just emphasis on what girls look like, what we should look like, what we should look like to be happy. And I think growing up, I just quickly, from outside my home, but also just inside my home, just felt that pressure of like, if you're going to be happy and content and in this life, then like you need to be skinny, you need to look a certain way. And so that was just compounded by different experiences and relationships. And so yeah, that lie set in pretty early of, if I don't look a certain way or fit in my clothes a certain way, then I'm, disgusted by myself, or I'm ugly, I'm fat. And so therefore, everything else in life is just, you can't enjoy it, or, like it's not, I don't, that's where my worth and my value was in that, even though I knew who Jesus was and I knew Jesus loved me. But I think deep down, like that lie took root of like, I have to be skinny to be happy, content, valued, loved, all those things.
And I guess then, so you developed bulimia. How bad did it get?
It's one of those things you don't, you're not born with an eating disorder. You don't aspire to have one someday. I remember as a kid hearing statistics, like they tell you in school, like this is what an eating disorder is. 1 in 4 of you were, there was some crazy statistic about like who would struggle with bulimia or anorexia or whatnot. And you just think like, why not? So that it was never like on my radar of something like I was going to struggle with. And, it was, I was just not the like tiny, skinny little girl with a great high metabolism, could eat whatever I wanted and like just super active. I was more, I wasn't unhealthy. I wasn't overweight. I just was built different. I looked different. I felt like, and so, Uh, but as I got older and like in my middle school, high school years and realized like, oh, like I can eat better and I can play volleyball and I can work out. And then, I was more fit and I did thin down. And so it was this like, this is great. And that did make me happy. And so then when, when I was 16 and I was not playing as much volleyball and kind of started taking advantage of that metabolism that I had developed, I gained weight and I just didn't want to go back to feeling that way. And so just, out of years of this lie, like building, and then just kind of out of desperation, it was like, I decided to, get rid of my food and that was like a easy solution. It wasn't something, you think like, oh, you think you're going to do it once and it won't be a big deal. And, and then it was like it just quickly became an addiction. In the sense of like, well, now it's this option I have. And so, it kind of just snowballed, from being something I did, feeling like I needed to do this so that I stop gaining weight or so I could lose weight or whatever. And then it became just over the course of months to a year, just kind of all consuming of, it was just a very like gradual thing. But by the time I was, 18, 19, 20, it was, I mean, it factored into almost every decision I made, what I did, where I went, what I ate, how I lived. It was it just becomes all consuming.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think that's right. Like, even though I walked through an eating disorder with a family member, a few years back, and there were times where I just like, it was so hard for me to understand. And it is true, right? Like when it comes to food, because I don't have that addiction. And yet now that I've walked through my own addiction, I can totally understand it, right? Like even just like what you said about it being all consuming. Like, yeah, that's what drinking did to me, right? It factored into every decision. Are we going to go out? Are we not going to go out? I've had a couple drinks and I'd rather just stay in. I don't want to drive, right? Like, is the place we're going to, do they have what I'm wanting, right? Like all that stuff. And so it is interesting how addictions can be so different, and yet at the core, there are things that are so true. And I think at the core are some of those lies that you talk about in the book, Desert Vineyards, again, which is just great. And I don't just say that because I had the opportunity to work with Sarah on putting it together. It is, it's truly just a great work. And it's not just for anyone who struggles with bulimia or infidelity or motherhood, because I don't struggle with any of those things. And yet it called me. It was actually a really big part of what the Lord used to woo me and reveal my own lies and that I was believing. So I do highly recommend it. So those lies, it's interesting because when we first started working on this book, it was like, what ties this all together, right? And you were the one that was talking kind of about these lies. And so maybe kind of bring us to the next part of your story, which is the infidelity, and how, in a sense, the bulimia and believing those lies kind of led you to make compromises in other areas.
Yeah. One of my favorite things I heard years ago from a pastor was just, he was preaching about compromise, and he was like, compromise will only lead to more compromise, right? Like compromise will never lead you to obedience. And so, as I compromised so many choices and things I had done and just kind of let bulimia, I mean, there were people in my life who, and my husband, like they knew I struggled with it, but nobody really knew how bad it was.
Same with alcohol, right? Like my wife knew I was struggling with it, but not the extent.
Yep. And and I had just gotten good at, I was still functioning. I had a job. I was married. I had friends. Like, it wasn't like I was starving myself, couldn't get out of bed, was so unhealthy. I need to, go get emergency, medical attention right away. Like I knew enough to like keep going and just, um, maintain this life or whatever, even though deep down, like I knew I wasn't well or wasn't doing well, but I just was not going to face that. And, but yeah, so I just think like as I kept that hidden and, really just wouldn't go there with, even admitting to my husband or my closest friends, just how bad it was. Then as other pieces of my life were going on, like, yeah, I knew how to compartmentalize those lies and those, that relationship I had with food and bulimia. And so then there was this other relationship now, with my husband's best friend, who we were all friends and he was my friend. And, but when things, happened with him, it was just, it wasn't easy, and it was very different, obviously, than bulimia. But when you're living in this darkness and these lies of bulimia, and then like not honest with yourself and with the Lord, then like Satan just he had that foothold, and he had this opportunity to just keep, lying to me. And I believed, that I could just not tell those things, and not, like it was just like little compromises, right? That just led to more and more until you're just so far into it that, that you ruin your marriage.
What were some of those? I mean, as someone, I'm walking through this with a couple right now. And I think, those of us who are married and have not had an affair, like, I will never do that, right? How does that happen? Like I know we talked about some of the lies and some of the compromises, but like in your story, and I know how it goes because I've read the book, right? But for people who haven't read the book, but will, how do you go from, hanging out with your husband's best friend to then cheating with him?
Whew, that's a loaded question. There, because, my husband has lots of friends, and none of his other friends did I have this same, like, his best friend, like we had a friendship, but we also just had this chemistry and connection that I didn't have with, anyone else or any of my husband's other friends. Right. And so, there was that piece. There was, the piece of just, the three of us, for a short amount of time, my husband and his best friend lived together while, I was dating my husband. And so, the three of us hung out. We were, comfortable with each other. There were, the level of comfortability, the level of, the things that were said and the jokes that were made and information shared between the guys in front of me and by, it was inappropriate without being like, so like in your, like it wasn't just outlandish, right? Like it was. And so that line of like what, was appropriate with his best friend was pretty blurry, real, like from early on.
Mm-hmm.
And GP takes, my husband takes, his responsibility of that. Like he acknowledges, like I did things, I said things where I didn't, protect you as my girlfriend, as my wife. I didn't cherish you the way I was supposed to. And so there was that piece of, the door was just kind of open, the line, like clearly, like me and his best friend knew there was a line, you don't cross this line, but that line was just so blurry at times that like it made it easier to cross that line eventually, right? And just the relationship, um that the kind of the three of us had, or the friendship that I had with this person outside of my marriage, never really was dealt with like the way it needed to be. And and I take responsibility for that. Like, there were things that were said to me, or conversations I had with this person, that I never told my husband about, right? And so, like, again, just like little compromise where I'm like, well, I'm not going to tell him that, and I'm not going to say, and so then it's like, well, now this happened, I'm not going to tell him that, and and so it just kind of like slowly and goes. And it was an affair, but not in the way of like, I wasn't looking for somebody else. I wasn't planning on leaving my husband. It wasn't this romantic, like, we're gonna, we fell in love and we're gonna like run away together kind of, relationship. It was, we were friends. We saw each other sometimes, without my husband around, like, because that was just our, like, he needed a ride home from the airport one time. Like, JP, you couldn't do it, so I did it. Like, I mean, that was a normal thing. That was not suspicious at all, right? But like, because we had that friendship, like, that door was then just like there for things to happen. And so, it was a handful of things over the course of a year and a half or so that, it by all definitions was definitely an affair. But again, it was, I don't know, it was messy.
So you're right. So, and JP, your husband, had no inkling, no clue, never suspected anything.
I mean, JP would say like, oh, I can't hang out tonight. You guys should hang out together. I mean, no, he had, obviously when he thinks about it now, or in hindsight, like, he was like, yes, I can see how, like, you guys had this, relationship, this connection. He knew that his best friend, found me attractive and found me, to be like, enjoyed my, being around. Like, he talks about, like, I need to find a girl like you. Like, that's what he would say, like, I just need to find a girl like you. Like, so, I mean, it was, JP was not, I think he trusted us so much. Like, he never expected these two people that he loved to do something so awful and betray him in the worst way, right? Yeah. Like, so he didn't suspect it, even though all the signs were there that, that it could happen, right? But I don't know, like, he never was like, I don't want you hanging out with him. I don't trust him. I mean, it just.
And how soon after you guys got married did this start happening?
It was, I mean, until like an actual like physical affair started, it was about a year into my marriage. But like, pieces of our relationship and conversations and things that have been said they started before we were married. Like, yeah, that.
And so you brought something up that I want to pause for a second and talk about, because I think this might be hard for some people. The couple I know of right now that's walking through this, though, the husband has said something similar, which is, in a sense, taking responsibility for their part in the affair, right? And that sounds, I think, initially you can sound like victim blaming, like, well, it's your fault, right, that I did this. And there isn't, like, if you say it like that, like, yes, I think that's victim blaming, but you've said it, this person has said it as well, of like, the husband, in this case it's both the husbands, because it's the wife that had an affair, is like, I can see where I messed up and where I wasn't, either leading my family, my wife, well. I was withholding stuff from her that she needed. What has your husband, what has JP come to recognize that he was doing or wasn't doing during that time?
When so it wasn't like, and if you read the book, you find it, like, it wasn't like JP like discovered, this or what. Like, I confessed the affair to him, and I took all the blame, right? Like, there was no piece of me that was like, you did this and you didn't, like, and this happened because of your actions or, things you didn't do. Um, I didn't even, even his best friend, like not that like I went to the point of, uh, defending him and everything, but I also didn't throw him under the bus, right? Like, of just like, this is all his fault. Like, it was just, if I'm going to confess, like, this is what I did and this is what I can apologize for. This is what I can, um, take responsibility for. And, I think over the course of a few months, because I mean, and with that, I knew that JP had a part in it. I knew, all three of us did. We all three made mistakes in our friendship and relationship, but I knew that like it wasn't for me to call out, JP's part in it. And so really I took full responsibility for what I did. And then over the course of a few months, I just remember him coming, having a conversation with JP while we were separated, where he goes, I forgive you. And like, I need you to forgive me because I didn't cherish you. Like, I knew who my best friend was. I knew that he cared about you. Right. Like, I knew that sometimes the three of us, our relationship, our friendship or whatever, that crossed a line or was inappropriate or just, whatnot. And so, he was like, I knew that and I ignored it. And I, like, I'm sorry for that. Like, I didn't cherish you the way I should have. I didn't protect you. I didn't like and I will say that JP is a wonderful, godly man and leader and, of our house and our kids and our marriage. And I think he just quickly recognized that, like, in that relationship, in that friendship with his best friend, like, he didn't take that godly leadership role, right? Like, he just, I don't know, we were young and stupid and, so it was huge for him to admit that, and to apologize and to ask for forgiveness and to just take ownership. I mean, right? Like, affairs are, of course, you're going to have the two people that cheated, that committed adultery, right? Like, that it's like, well, it was just them, but there's always this other person of like, what was going on in the relationship, right? And so it's not a blame thing. I don't, like, I get what you're saying. It's not, well, I'm blaming you for this or it's your fault or like, I think it's just, it's something though that has to be addressed. It's a healthy part of like healing because because none of us are perfect. And so we all, have our roles in these imperfect relationships we have. Right. So yeah, I think taking responsibility just for what we do is huge. And JP did that and owns it. And,
when it comes to, I guess the question that I get asked, I ask myself as well, and I want to ask you is, so people will say, how can you as a Christian that became an alcoholic, right? A Christian that had an affair, not like someone who had an affair and then like through the reconciliation process finds Jesus, right? How do you answer that question? Sarah, you were going to church, you grew up in, you were a Christian, you guys were both, like, how could this happen? Like, how do you as a Christian fall into this?
Well, I think that answer to that is just so simple. And that's where like I think Satan lies to all of us, right? Like, I mean, of course he's, like, got his lies in the world and in, like, and lies to the people that, that aren't Christians to keep them away from, coming to know Christ and following Christ. Right. But he's still, even once we're saved, and I believe our souls are, kept by the Holy Spirit, like, they're sealed. And like, even though my eternal fate is dealt with and I, like, I will meet my Savior one day and spend eternity with Jesus. Like, I fully believe that, never doubted that. But that doesn't mean that the enemy doesn't still lie to me, because why wouldn't he, right? Like, he wants us to be ineffective in his kingdom. He wants us to not tell our stories, not talk about God, like live in sin. And, like, even though we're saved, like he may not affect our soul and our like eternal um well-being, but he can certainly destroy our lives, right? Like he can certainly destroy our earthly lives by telling us lies and by having those footholds so that we don't live for Christ and we don't abide in Jesus and we don't walk with him because we're not, because he doesn't want other people to know about Jesus and to be saved and learn, and so if I am deceived by the enemy, then I'm not living fully and for Jesus and walking with Jesus, then how many opportunities am I then missing to love people and share Jesus with people? And, and so I think, of course, the enemy is going to lie to Christians and I'm saved, but I'm not perfect. I'm still human. Right. And I still will sin. Not as like, I don't have an excuse to sin just because I'm saved, but I certainly will still sin as long as I'm on this earth, right? Because we're imperfect. And so, I think the devil certainly targets Christians as far as like attacking us, and he wants us to struggle and, so that we're ineffective for Christ's kingdom. And, if he can, the Bible says he comes to destroy and steal and kill, and, he doesn't stop just because you're saved.
And I think that's so important, right? And I love that you're like, well, it's actually pretty simple, right? Because I think there's some people who are like, well, and we have pastors and stuff who fall, and there is a little bit of a the Bible
Sure.
talks about the higher standard that they are called to, but yet it is the same thing in a sense that they believe lies, I believe lies, you believe lies. And we're all on this journey of sanctification, right? Of constantly being made to look more like Jesus. And in that process, there's going to be lies that we believe. There's going to be sins that we commit. There's going to be struggles that we have, right? Take us through how, you talked about that you went to JP, your husband, and confessed everything. How did you get to that point? And what does that story sound like? How do you get to the point where you're just like, okay, I can't take it anymore. Let me just come clean.
There were a lot of little pieces to that of, I share my book of like, there would be like things along the way that would just convict me, right? Like I had to some extent in some days, like I could just live with the lies I believed and the fact that I had, kept all this from JP, and that I could just not think about it or not deal with it. And I just kind of shoved it aside. And then there were other days where like it just weighed on me, right? Like, and I felt guilt and I felt remorse and I felt just conviction. And so, and then there were like things that would happen. There was this one movie we watched that was like all dealt with like an affair. And it was just like, oh, like it was like, because in the movie, like all this pain was caused. And I was, in my mind is just running crazy because I'm just
Right.
like, oh my gosh, like, and he has no idea. And I think just like over time, it was just like, it was little things like that. Going back and getting into a routine of going to church and just like our jobs were, at that time were shift work and, lots of weekends and nights and days. I mean, we were just never on the same page as far as our schedule. So it was really hard in the beginning to like go to church consistently. And I know when we finally did, like every week, I'm worshiping and praying and standing before God. And I just felt that conviction, and Jesus was just like, and I knew like, of course, like I knew Jesus already knew, right? And I had prayed about it and I had told him, like, I'm sorry, and, confessed everything to the Lord. But I very clearly like, could hear the spirit of just like, your husband doesn't know your sin, and you can't stand before me and be right and holy in a blameless marriage the way I designed it, like, unless you confess, unless you tell him everything. And initially I think God, put something like that on your heart and you're just like, nope,
Yep.
not doing it. No thanks. And how do I bypass that? And I just think over time it just became so clear to me, like, I can't bypass this. I can't take this lie to my grave. I can't. And I knew deep down that, like, if I don't confess this, like, this relationship is not going to end with, my adulterous relationship, even though, like, I, again, like, it wasn't this constant pursuit of each other. And it, like, we would, I think, feel, remorseful and say, like, we're not going to ever let that happen again. Right. And then months would go by and it did. And so it was just like, I knew that if I don't confess it, like, I can say all day that, like, nothing's ever going to happen again, but, like, it's going to keep happening. And so, God just, I think, with his truth, and that's like my book of just, like, I believed all these lies, but when you start letting God's truth and his promises, like, take down those walls in your heart so that he can speak to you, like, and all that truth sets in, you're just like, oh, okay. Like, this is what God has told me to do. And so I remember it was a Sunday when I told him I was in church and I'm praying, and I know that, like, oh my gosh, like, I have to do this. And I knew that I couldn't not confess. And so it was like, but I also couldn't, like, even get my head around the reality of what might happen or what that was going to look like. And so I just remember praying, and we had, like, the whole series that we were in at that church at that time was the, like, I am statements of Jesus being like, I am the bread of life, and I am the truth, and I am the good shepherd, and all, and over and over, God is I am. And I just remember God just like, Sarah, like, I am. And no matter what happens, like, I am still God, and I am still good, and I still love you. And so I just got to this point where I was like, I have to be right with God again. I cannot be right with God. And I wanted my marriage. I wanted my marriage to be good and holy and pure. And I hated, my sin. And so just coming to that place of just like, I can't go on like this. And the only way to, get to a holy, blameless marriage again and stand right before God is to confess.
Mm-hmm.
And
so I think you said a couple things, and we'll get to his reaction. But one is, it's funny you say how just like you start seeing things all over the place about whether it's adultery or coming clean. Like right before I hit rock bottom, like I can't tell you how many stories I read, people I saw talking about sobriety, talking about alcoholism, and I'm just like,
and that's just the Holy Spirit working, right?
Yeah, right. I'm like, oh my gosh, can we stop this already? You know what I mean? So it's funny. Like, I think that is interesting. That happens. And I think, the second thing is you're talking about like sitting in church, and like, I do think to, in a sense, continue what you had said earlier is like people like me, people like you, people like all of us who have maybe especially a secret sin that we're dealing with is, on one hand, yes, we're sitting in church and we're letting some of the stuff go over our head, but in another sense, it's not. It's taking root. Like I remember there was one Saturday night I got drunk, and I can't remember all the details, like if it was like something where I made a fool out of myself or something to Brett, or I don't know what it was. But I remember waking up the next day and feeling so convicted. We have 3 services at our church. I literally went to all 3 services and just sat there, right? And it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I'm just, if I listen to enough of the sermon and then I can, I'll feel good about myself. It was like something inside of me. It was like I knew I needed Jesus, right? Now, my drinking didn't magically stop that Sunday.
Sure.
right? But there is also something inside of us, something inside of me that was like, no, like you need Jesus so bad. And in that moment, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to sit through all 3 services. Absolutely. Like I had to.
Yeah.
So how did JP react? And I want to lead up to the story. I want to lead up to the bathroom story.
Oh gosh.
And so,
I love you go bathroom story.
It is the bathroom story. It's great. So how did JP react? What happened in your marriage immediately after?
Well, I chose to tell him when we were, we lived about an hour away from Estes Park, and
which is in Rocky Mountain.
Yeah, Rocky Mountain National Park. Yeah, and we were just outside the park. We went up to get lunch, and so that's where I told him, and it was a very quiet ride home. There was, he was just stunned, right? I mean, he was just quiet because he had questions, obviously, immediately, but most of the questions would come later, right? Like at first, it was just like, how do I process that? Like my best friend and my wife betrayed me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and then I think he was just trying to like piece all that together. So he was, I write this like, he could have just like pushed me out of the car and been like, find your own way home, right? Like I would have deserved that, but he didn't. He was kind and he drove me home. And like that night, I left. Like he very kindly was like, I need space and time. Like you should probably go stay at your parents. And I was like, okay, so saw that coming, right? Like that wasn't like a shock or anything. But devastating nonetheless of just like, oh my gosh, like, are we gonna survive this? And so, yeah, overall, I would say, he was just shocked, but he was so kind. Like,
yeah,
he didn't hit me or cuss me out or, I deserved all of that and more. And he didn't.
Well, you didn't deserve the hitting part. Let's be honest.
Well, yeah.
No one does.
Might have done some good, but also just like you want, when you like apologize for something, you feel so bad, and you're like, can you please just like
almost be angry?
I deserve, right?
Yeah.
Like just hit me or like yell at me or slap like something because that's what like I deserve. And instead, he was kind, which is, just like
almost worse. You're like, this is how great of a guy you are. Yeah. I get that. And so you guys separated. And you're kind of in limbo for a long time. Like, are we going to stay together? Are we not? And so you have this moment where you go to the house and you're having this conversation, and he tells you the worst thing. So take us to that.
So what's funny is I was looking through some stuff. So I write this blog, Giggles to Glory, right? And so I've got like all these things that my kids say that are just hilarious. And so a lot of times I say, but God, like, shares things through those, with me or like teaches me. And so on this topic, like we're in the car one time and I think my son was like 3 or 4 at the time, I was Finn. And he goes, and I'm listening to a sermon and the sermon's talking about like, whatever you do, like married people, like don't say the D word, like just don't go there. Don't talk, like it's not an option. You don't talk about the D word, right? And, my son's back there looking at his hands and he's like, Mom, what finger stands for the D word? Like, oh my God. It's like, I was like, they're just talking about divorce, babe. It's not a bad word. Like, it's not a cuss word. There's no finger for it, right? Like, he's like, what? It stands for the D word.
It's the pinky. Like, you give someone the pinky, it's the D word.
It was bad. So yeah, we have gotten to this point. We've been separated for probably 5-6 months, and he finally was like, I think we should get a divorce. He finally said it, out loud. Like, and it wasn't the first time we talked about possibly getting a divorce. Like he had told me in the past, well, I looked into it and I looked at what how do I file for divorce? Like, it wasn't the first time he had mentioned divorce, but he hadn't said. Up until that point, he had never said, I want a divorce. We're getting a divorce. I don't want to be with you anymore. really up until that point, I mean, it was pretty quickly once we were separated, it was, I still love you and I forgive you. I just don't know how to trust you. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know where we go from here. And so, and then ultimately it was just like, yeah, a lot of limbo waiting of like, okay, like, are we going to do this then? Are we going to stay married and figure this out? Or are we going to part ways and get a divorce? And finally he said, I think we should get a divorce. And, part of me had been waiting for him to say that for months. And part of me was also just like, the words came out of his mouth. And he likes to tell people that I told him no. Like he'll tell people, he's like, well, I told her I wanted a divorce and she told me no. And I'm like, I did not say no. What I said was,
wait.
Okay.
Wait, you said I don't believe you right away, right? Or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I said, I was just like, yeah, I mean, that was like the first thing I said back to, I mean, in a very like respectful way. I wasn't trying to be snotty or like, I don't believe you, it wasn't like that at all. It was a very like solemn, like serious, respectful, like, I know you and I know you love me. I know you want this marriage. And I know like we both obviously were like trusting God and seeking God. And so I was just like, I knew we both believed that like nothing was too big for God to, take and restore. And so I didn't believe that he was truly at peace with that decision. I knew because I knew him and I knew like our relationship where we were at that time of just like, I don't believe you. I don't believe that you actually believe that there's no other choice but for us to get a divorce. But at the same time, I was like, if that's what you want, I'll be respectful and I will leave. And you're going to get what you want. Like, if that's what you say you want, but I'm just letting you know, I don't really believe you.
And so you're at the house. He tells you this, and you like get in your car and leave, right? But tell the rest of the story.
I think the second I like got out of his presence, I just lost it, like bawling, like ridiculously. And I'm driving down the road and I was just like, I shouldn't probably be driving because I can't see anything through my tears. And so I had stopped. I was in like just a parking lot. And I called my sister. Like, I told her what he had said, but I don't even remember how long that conversation or what happened. I know I called my sister, but I get off the phone with her and I just was like, I have to pee so bad.
Now you know why I call it the pee story, the bathroom story.
And honestly, like I didn't want to go into a public place. Like I was a wreck and I just was like, and I was so like, I was like, I've lost all like dignity and whatever. Like at this point, I'm like, I'm just going back to the house and using my bathroom. Like, and then I'll leave again. Like, and I don't know why. I mean, to this day, of like, it was a God thing because I am stubborn. My husband would tell you I am so like. There's in my head, like I was like, there's no way I'm going back to that house. Not until he was supposed to go to work that day. So in my head, I'm not going back to that house until he leaves for work, and then I'll get all my stuff and leave. That was my thought was, I'll come back. He works a 10-hour shift. I'll get all my stuff out of the house before he gets home from work. But for whatever reason, I just was like, I just did not want to go to a public place and go to the bathroom. And so I was like, screw it. I'm going home and I'm going to walk in and go to the bathroom and walk right back out. And, I had no intention of starting another conversation. I didn't really want to talk to him. I mean, at that point, I just was like, he's done. I'm done. Like, as much as like, that's not what I wanted. And I was grieving that. I also was just like, finally, like a decision, like finally we can like go a direction. Right. And if that's what he wants, then I'm done fighting. Like I was exhausted.
So you walk back in.
So I go back in. I was like, I'm just here to use the bathroom. Like don't need to touch me. Don't talk to me. Don't whatever. I don't think I said all that, but I just was like, I'm going to the bathroom. But just so like he knew, like I'm not coming back here for a conversation. Like this isn't for you. And so I tried to leave again. I mean, I just walked right by him, trying to get out of the house, like through the hall. And he grabbed my arm and he was like, Sarah, like, and I pulled, you know, I was just like, I didn't want him to touch me. I was just done. And he didn't let go. And he was like, no, stop. He's like, Sarah, you're right. I don't want to get a divorce. Like, that's not what I want. Like, you're right. I'm not okay with it. Right. And I'm just like, great, thanks. Which was like everything you want to hear, but also just like, seriously, like,
Wow.
just trying to catch up and process all over again, like, you know, where we were at, where we were going. But yeah, that was the pivotal moment that just ended our separation, changed the direction of
your lives, really. I mean,
our lives.
Yeah. And so, if you want the rest of the story, please go pick up the book Desert Vineyards. You can get it on Amazon, by Sarah Matzke. And there was another part of the story. We just don't have time to get to it today, but I think it's really important. And I think it's probably, if it's not already, it should be a blog of yours, which is, I think what's really important, and this came as Sarah and I were working on this book together. We got to final edits, and she sent me back the manuscript. She's like, hey, by the way, there's 2 extra chapters. And I'm like, oh, okay, 2 extra chapters. And it's a really important, I think, conversation that Sarah has with you, the reader, and with herself, which is, hey, I'm going to be really honest. Like, I still have feelings for the guy, right? And like, you may hear that and you're like, oh my God, what? Has there not been healing? And I think what Sarah goes on to explain is so wise and so important about what she does with those feelings and why they are still there, and how her husband even, I mean, that the scene that you describe in the book of when you talk to your husband about that, I mean, it just, like, I was rereading it the other day and it makes me cry every time, right? And so I really want to encourage people to go pick up the book, especially if you've been in an adulterous relationship, if you're the wife, if you're the husband. And what she describes, I think, is so real and so raw and so important. And then there's a whole nother section on motherhood in the book that's really awesome too. I can't relate to because I'm not a mother, but you can if you are a woman and you are a mother or want to be. I guess especially if you want to be, because there's infertility. There's do I find my identity in my motherhood? So please go pick up the book Desert Vineyards. Sarah, what do you feel like? We talk about that was stupid, and so this is what I'll end with. You did not want to write this book, and so really that was stupid moment of your story is Lord, I'm okay. I'm going to write this book. I'm going to tell everyone, not just my husband. I'm going to tell everyone my story. I'm going to lay myself bare. What do you think? What brought you to that point to make that decision, and what do you think is the lesson there?
You know, I talk about this at the end of the book of just like, God put this book on my heart. Like, he told me to write, like, pretty shortly after, restoring my marriage and starting a family. Like, I just had this, like, it just was on my heart. Like, every time I prayed, like, and talked to God, he was just like, you should write your story. And I had procrastinated and I had started and stopped. And I think, a few years ago that I just got to this point where I was sick of my disobedience and I was sick of not fully, like, I knew I had kind of blogged and kind of written my story in pieces and I was open to sharing it with anybody who wanted to talk about it. But it was just like, God's like, yeah, but you still haven't done what I asked you to do. Like, you still didn't write your book. And so I just got tired of standing before God and him being like, you still haven't listened and you still haven't obeyed. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to seriously do this. And, and then I think writing it and being done with it probably about a year and a half ago now. And then there was trying to figure out like, how do I publish this and how, and then we, met, were introduced to each other, and praise the Lord, because you were able to edit it and get me all the tools and things that needed to take it from, what I had written to like make it into an actual a book. And so, but yeah, this last year of just like, man, like knowing that it's actually going to be published. And I think it hasn't been, people have been so supportive. So it hasn't been people telling me this is so stupid, don't do this. It's been the enemy being like, this is so stupid, don't publish it, you shouldn't have written it, like, why did you do this? And so I think the lesson there that like I'm still hanging on to is just like, God put this on my heart, and God's not stupid, and he has a purpose and he has a plan for it. And so I'm just trying to like every day, you just let go, and like God has been faithful throughout my story. Like my story is totally about God's glory and his faithfulness and his redemption and grace. And so when I, hear that lie of just like, this was so stupid, I just always come back to like, but God is faithful, and he's told me to do this. He gave me everything I needed to do it. Like he encouraged me along the way. Like I did it through his strength and his power. Right. And so, I think the lesson is just like, do what God puts on your heart to do. Like, right. Like just obey, and, he'll see you through it, and the enemy will probably tell you you're doing a really stupid thing. Don't do it. But if you know it's from God, and Jesus, and like, you prayed about it, and you sought wisdom and discernment on it, and like, no, I'm going to do this because it's from God. Like he's faithful to, see us through that, and then use it however he wants. Right. Like I really have no expectations for what comes next. I just want God to, I know already from people that have read it and walked with me along this whole journey of just like, God used it in your life, and God used it in my friends' lives, of just like, God has spoken to them through pieces of my story. And so I just love that. And so that's the goal.
And that's what I would say to people who are listening to this. You don't have to be a woman. You don't have to have struggled with an eating disorder. You don't have to have, struggled with adultery. You don't have to have struggled with infertility or motherhood. Me, as a man who was struggling with alcohol when I first took on this project, and we've been on this project for a little bit. I mean, like a year and a half.
Maybe.
Yeah. But like, it spoke to me and it helped me, right? Like it was one of the things you took, I talked about like going to church and sitting through in sermons, and, in some ways, like they're just going over your head, but not, and I would say this is one of those, like I'm reading this book and I'm like convicted, right? About, dang it, my own lies, and how I need to be open and honest about this. And, the best way to get over shame is to be vulnerable about it. And so you have embraced that. It's helped me embrace it. So Sarah, thank you so much for being obedient. It has made a difference in my life. I know it's going to make a difference in other people's lives. Please go out and buy Desert Vineyards. Get it on Amazon. Where can people go to find out more about you and read your other writing?
So I have a website. It's my name. It's sarahjeanmatzke.com. It's also Giggles to Glory is the blog. So you can find me on there with all the social media links, and my blog and pictures of me and my family and that kind of stuff. But
all five of those boys, that basketball team. All right, Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Like for this, but for the book, just everything. Like it's just been so clear. Again, another way of like God just showing up and being like, I know who you need, and I know the connections we're gonna have and make, and just how God weaves it all together, and his timing on everything has just been evident. And so super, super thankful for you, and just know that this was a God thing. So thank you.
I do not take that for granted. I seriously don't. I believe that to my core, and it has been such an honor to be a part of this process with you. Thank you. I hope you can see exactly why I was so excited about you hearing Sarah's story. And I think there's so much more, right? We kind of got through that last part. We got to that was stupid moment, but even that wasn't the main point, right? And so I'm glad she has written her story. I'm glad that she didn't listen to her inner critic, that she didn't listen to the devil saying, that's stupid, don't write this, because it really did have an impact on my life. And I had a chance to write the foreword to Sarah's book, and I talk a little bit more about that. Just the impact that it made on my life. And I think if you're listening to this, you've made it this far, it's hopefully making an impact on yours, or maybe you know someone who needs to hear this story, who needs to read this book. I would be honored if you sent that this episode to them. Once again, like, rate, subscribe, share. We are telling stories, having candid conversations of people who took chances, and it ended up being life-changing, or life-giving. And Sarah's story for sure falls into that for me, even personally. Thanks for joining us for That Was Stupid. We will be back again in 2 weeks with another episode. Until then, take care.